let's just talk briefly about the challenges. When you sit down with Jose or I, we'll often be dealing with problems, but usually the problem is one thing more than anything else. It's called patience and progress, setting incremental goals where you go step by step. So, for example, working remotely is difficult for students who are not accustomed to self-paced learning. They're usually more used to getting tasks. Read this and write about it and submit it on Blackboard. In order to have effective flipped classroom, you need much more prep time to create and build assignments because you need to be able to give them something that they don't need to ask you a question. All the answers are in the package you have made for them. Now, when you come into the classroom, students who are shy can have an even harder time in an interactive flipped classroom situation simply and only because they were not that comfortable speaking in public to begin with. So one of the ways that you can really help this is to give students time to adapt and to also give the students interactive activities that are low stakes or no stakes. Like you could do more than one icebreaker. Icebreakers are not just for week one. I had a class that I felt like every time I went into the class, I heard crickets. They were so quiet. So one day I finally said, you know what? We got to lighten up here a little bit. And so we went around the room and everybody told an embarrassing story, and they told hilarious, embarrassing stories, and some of them were funny. Some of them were painful to hear, about somebody rehearsing music on a piano for weeks and then not remembering a single note. But when students share this stuff, it's like talking around a campfire and they become more accustomed to each other and more comfortable speaking to each other. So think about that. And let's also talk about the benefits. Students have much more control and develop self-discipline. They spend more time in active roles that promotes better engagement, and students engaging with their peers help them to develop collaborative skills. Faculty engage with students in small groups or individually because your role becomes the facilitator, not the big boss, not the sole center of attention, but as somebody who's helping things along. So imagine that every class is like a bar mitzvah or a wedding where you're going and visiting your guests at each table. And you might see some tables are quiet and you might want to spice it up a little bit with some conversation. You got to go from table to table. This is a picture of one of my classrooms where students are working together in groups on a project, and they're all sharing these large screens. You don't have to have large screens. It would work just as well with a laptop, right, Jose?
Yeah, it shouldn't matter whether it's on a big screen or on a laptop, as long as they're working together.
Yeah, and Jose, maybe you might want to talk a little bit about like how a product like Padlet can be used in live synchronous sessions as well as asynchronous, because I think Padlet has really gotten a lot of traction at FIT, and it's one of the few platforms that really works in real time, right?
Yeah, I mean, Padlet's, I guess the reason why Padlet has gained so much traction is also for the reason that you can drop in, and students can just drop in all their work in one place, and it's very visual, engaging, and students can collaborate together. And I think that's something that was missing from Blackboard was a place that you can just dump students' work in there, and we can all work on it together, and and visually being able to see the work right away in real time, like Jeffrey says, it's real time, and so even if you do it asynchronously or synchronously, the work is on real time.
Yeah, and and this is not unlike when you share a Google Doc and work live. The only difference is Padlet is beautifully structured to accommodate different style assignments.
Right.
So, what Jose and I like to see is somebody coming in saying, "I have an assignment I would like my students to work on together, and here's what the assignment would be." And then Jose and I can make recommendations as opposed to somebody who has tried to use Padlet. They're a little frustrated by it and they just want help to make something they built work.
Right.
You know, we have imaginations and we have experience working with faculty in many disciplines. And for that reason, we're able to say, well, you know what, maybe Padlet's not the right tool. Maybe you want to use VoiceThread for that one. Or
Right.
maybe you just want to use a Google Doc. You know, because there's nothing wrong with collaborating in any of those tools, but they each have different strengths. One thing
Exactly.
about, go ahead. I'm sorry,
Oh, no,
Jose.
I was going to jump in on that one, Jeffrey, because you're 100% correct on that. Sometimes faculty see technology and they want to really use it, and they get that, fever of using, I want to use this, I want to use that because I saw another professor uses using VoiceThread or using Padlet. But the first step is understanding what is your learning objectives and finding the right tool if the technology is even needed at all. So the purposeful use of the technology also has to be addressed. So just keep in mind, just because your colleague is using Padlet or VoiceThread, that doesn't mean you have to use it. I mean, they might be using it for a different purpose, totally different than what you had intended.
Exactly. So, and by the way, a lot of times you'll find an innovative way to do something that we wouldn't have thought of just simply by giving us the problem.
Right.
We don't tell everybody about every feature because that would be incredibly boring.